This video will feature some Black Clover manga spoilers. You've been warned. Yuno Grinbarion, the current captain of the Golden Dawn, one of the Clover Kingdom's best Magic Knight brigades, and the heir to the Spade Kingdom's throne. Wielder of two magic types, Wind and Star, and fielding two grimoires, including a 4-leaf clover. Likely the most talented character in all of Black Clover, and the second hardest working, behind only his brother, Asta. He is the current frontrunner at becoming the next Wizard King, versus Noelle Silva, a royal of the Silva clan, someone who had a very different path to power than Yuno. While she was born with a seemingly divine amount of mana, her vessel was tainted. She couldn't control her magic, so she could rarely manifest a strong spell, and when she did, it would either miss the target or run rampant and nearly kill her and those around her. Instead of training to increase her power, she had to follow a very different path than Yuno, as she had the power from the very beginning, and thus she needed to train to control her vast, untamed magic power to become a successful Magic Knight and wring out the shame in her initial existence as a weak royal. Because both of these characters are a part of the fandom dubbed Light Triad alongside their greatest comrade, the main character Asta, they are often compared to each other. Yuno is Asta's brother, and the two share a goal at becoming the Wizard King of the Clover Kingdom. Noelle is Asta's squad mate within the Black Bulls. A lot of what her goal is to gain Asta's attention in order to attain his love, but also for him to see her progression and her own power level as a competent Magic Knight, that she is worthy of being at his side. Because of their connections to Asta, Yuno versus Noelle has become one of the most common, controversial, and divisive matchups in all of Black Clover, nearly getting to the level of scrutiny in the Asta versus Yuno debate. Outside of this being a genuinely interesting matchup, I have my very own opinion on it, so I want to go over their power levels, abilities, feats, and scaling to discuss who would win in a 1 versus 1 battle, and why it's not even close. To clarify, this is only Yuno versus Noelle from the Spade Saga, Saint Yuno versus Saint Noelle, as it wouldn't be fair nor interesting to use current Yuno, who just got easily hundreds of times more powerful over the 15-month time skip, whereas Noelle has yet to show her own new power in the Black Clover's final saga. Don't worry, I'm sure that one day I'll be doing my own video of Neverland Yuno versus Sea Goddess Noelle, but I can't do that just yet. I think it would be fun to actually go over the different versions of Noelle and Yuno from the Spade Saga, which is called the Heart Kingdom Joint Struggle arc, taking place between chapters 229 and 261, or episodes 158 to 167 of the anime. Then I'll compare them at their strongest in the second and final arc of the Spade Saga, the Spade Raid arc, which is from chapters 261 to 331. With that being said, let's get into round 1, Yuno versus Noelle, and the Heart Kingdom Joint Struggle arc. I think we've all been there. You're bored, you're either in the car, on a bus, or on a train. You've ran out of manga to read, there's nothing for you to do. Well, luckily, I can help you stave your boredom. Enter Raid Shadow Legends. I love the fantasy genre, and Raid Shadow Legends absolutely nails it. But it's not just the aesthetics, the art quality, or cool designs, but also very fun gameplay that no other mobile game can match. Sometimes it's a little too good, and I have to stop myself from playing, or else I'll miss parts of my chemistry lectures. There's a common question that you've probably been asked before. If you could pick any 4 historical figures to have a dinner with, who would you pick? Well, what about if we did that with Raid Shadow Legends characters? I would invite Versilf the Grim, Versalis Gravedirt, Rule the Huntmaster, and Ultimate Death Knight to my dinner party because they're gonna help me go hunt this dragon. This April, Raid is going on an egg hunt, but we're not hunting for normal eggs, we're hunting for dragon eggs. Just download Raid Shadow Legends using the links below, copy your in-game player ID, and then head on over to this link right here from April 14th to May 15th. Enter your player ID and then journey through the flaming portal to embark on an exciting AR adventure. Scour the dragon's lair using your phone, and if you find the hidden egg, you'll be in for a chance to win amazing in-game items and even real-life prizes, ranging from legendary Raid champions to Amazon gift cards with a total value of $20,000. This is for new players only. With all this exciting stuff and more coming to Raid, if you haven't started playing yet, then what are you waiting for? New players can use my link or scan the QR code right here and get a free starter pack with this cool in-game loot. Once you're in and crushing your enemies, come find me under the name Broku72, join my clan, and we'll be legends together. So just hit my link in the description, and I'll see you in the battlefield. After playing a huge role in the defeat of the Word Devil Zagrid, Yuno would continue to keep training for the looming threat of the devil residing in the Spade Kingdom. Most of his training during the 6-month time skip is unknown, though we do know that at some point he actually participated in a battle with Longrus in order to determine who would take over as the Golden Dawn's vice captain. This was a Longrus who had gotten a lot stronger and retained the proficiency in his offensive spatial magic comparable to Ratri, the elf who had taken over his body back in the Elf Saga. Yuno would take the W, thus becoming the vice captain of the Golden Dawn. Now there's a massive debate on which Yuno is stronger, Elf Yuno from the Elf Saga or Yuno from the first arc of the Spade Saga. Many people believe that Yuno is weaker because they say he's lost his elf form, and many other of the Golden Dawn members did not surpass the elves over the 6-month time skip. But the second point isn't relevant in my opinion. Just because some of the Golden Dawn did not surpass their elven counterparts does not mean Yuno did not. For example, Charlotte provably surpassed Sharla, as Sharla essentially stalemated Elf Saga Yami, but Charlotte scaled to Yami while in the Captain's Royale match, this being a Yami stated by Lolopechka to have attained a whole new dimension of power. Also, Yuno never actually lost his elven power, it stayed with him. This is proven after his initial defeat against Devil Xenon, and he actually talks to the elven soul that is still inside of him. Also, we see that Belle retains her form that equates to Elf Yuno. When Yuno initially turned into an elf, Belle got stronger too, and she attained long ears because her power increased. Belle still has these long ears after the time skip, meaning that Yuno is just as strong as his elven self at the very least. But thanks to the addition of the stage system around this time, we have even more proof that Spade Yuno isn't just as strong as Elf Yuno, but far, far stronger. Put it simply, being stage 1 means that you can keep up in a fight with a devil stronger than Zagrid. Since these are semi-large gaps between the stages, one can extrapolate that a stage 0 mage can fight a devil stronger than Zagrid pretty well. Both Yuno and his opponent's stage would be revealed when he would fight the Dark Disciple known as Godaroy. They were both stage 0. What this means is that both Yuno and Godaroy would be more than strong enough to fight Zagrid. Yuno would go on to defeat Godaroy with a Zephyr, and then he'd help Klaus and Leteli defeat the other Dark Disciple, Foil. Then Xenon, in the conclusion with his fight with William, collapses the Golden Dawn base, and Yuno would quickly reactivate his Zephyr and go into his fight with Xenon. Now, Xenon doesn't really struggle with Yuno, as he completely stalemates him with bone magic while using a lesser percentage of his devil power, and then he would increase his devil power to 55% and defeat Yuno pretty easily. When it comes to this arc for Noelle, she gets downplayed so much and I just don't understand it. With people calling her useless without Lolopechka's Mana Methodix Mana Zone Ludic Sanctuary spell that nerfed Vanika's blood magic and also boosted Noelle's magic power. But the reality is that essentially, this is anti-Noelle propaganda. Sure, did she take Lolopechka's help initially? Yes, this is undeniable. But what about after? Noelle literally outspeeds Vanika and impales her with her lance, piercing right through her body while Vanika is in 70% devil power and Magicula partially manifested. Not only that, but she activates a higher level of her Sea Dragon's Roar, and while Vanika does cancel it out, Noelle still makes Vanika cough up blood and forces her to recognize Noelle's strength and potential. Even prior to this, Noelle was partially dodging Vanika's attacks, as there were pieces of her armor that were left on her Valkyrie form, and she would basically dodge it so that it would hit her armor pieces instead of her skin. People try and argue that Noelle doesn't have speed scaling to Vanika because she was only partially dodging it, but that's not how physics works. Imagine if I wore a Kevlar bulletproof vest that didn't completely cover my torso. There was many holes in it. Imagine it was like a honeycomb style bulletproof vest, and I was running towards somebody with a machine gun ready to shoot. If they mag dumped on me and I maneuver my body so that every bullet hits the spotted armor instead of my skin and goes through it and kills me, that means I would have speed skilling to those bullets. And this discounts Noelle literally just like blitzing Vanika and impaling her anyways. Even with this feat, people still try to downplay Noelle because they say she had Lolopechka's help and Vanika was nerfed, which isn't true. By this point, the water spirit was cursed and out of commission, and Lolopechka was not able to help anymore, which means that Noelle did all of this with her own power, and it's only a fraction of her power. As it stated, she didn't have a lot of magic left, and we can see her Valkyrie armor was not fully layered out. Okay, so who wins? Spirit Zephyr Yuno or Valkyrie Noelle of this arc? Well, I think that nearly all the evidence points to Noelle being the victor in the Heart Kingdom joint struggle arc. And it's actually very straightforward. Yuno could barely do anything to a Xenon that was using an unknown percentage of devil power and got absolutely ragdolled by a 55% Xenon. whereas Noelle was able to go against 70% Vanica while low on magic power and have speed scaling to her, inflict a lot of damage upon her, and even showed durability scaling as well, because when Vanica's magic hit Noelle's armor, it pretty much didn't do anything. And since Noct referred to the Dark Triad as all as strong as each other, that would mean that Noelle both fought a superior opponent and performed better against them. People do try and argue that Yuno actually scales to Xenon because he could cut through his magic, and supposedly Xenon needed to activate absolute space on him, and really it was just a lot of evidence that Xenon was just messing around with Yuno and holding back. Remember, Yuno was tired fighting Xenon, so it really doesn't make sense that he goes from actually having some difficulty in defeating God Roy at full strength to actually doing anything against Xenon with some devil power while he's tired. But it doesn't really matter. If you believe that Yuno scales to this unknown devil percentage Xenon, Noelle has better scaling. Remember that Xenon said that Yuno was around 50% Dark Disciple level, whereas Vanica can one-shot a 50% Dark Disciple in her base form. And Noelle actually has durability, speed, and attack potency scaling to 70% Vanica. And sure, Yuno was tired against Xenon, not nearly as tired as Noelle, who had barely any of her magic power left, and had to surpass her limits with only a partial Valkyrie armor. And even when Noelle lost nearly all of her magic power in Valkyrie form, she was able to neg an exploding life spell from a 50% Dark Disciple. Look at it like this. Xenon compares Yuno to a 50% Dark Disciple. Vanica in her base form with no devil power can easily one-shot a 50% Dark Disciple with a kick, yet Noelle in her Valkyrie armor with no help from Olapechka forces Vanica to actually use some of her devil power and activate a spell. So yeah, it's pretty clear that Noelle is the winner in round 1 of the Spade Saga. Now let's make our way to round 2. Saint Yuno versus Saint Noelle of the Spade Raid arc is far more nuanced and far harder to accurately scale this battle. So please stick with me here, we have a lot to go over. Again, this is a specific matchup that is probably the most hotly debated within the community, with honestly some really bad arguments on both sides. For example, people on the Noelle camp will say that because Boreas Yuno lost to 100% Xenon, whereas Noelle bodied 100% Vanica, that means Noelle is stronger, even though that leaves out Yuno's main power-up of the Spade Saga. Also, the weirdest anti-Yuno argument is that people argue that Devil Xenon is only Zagreid level because of this statement here, even though this was not talking about Xenon's strength in comparison to Zagreid, but his aura, because he literally became a devil like Zagreid. He was no longer human. Noelle stands fail to realize that even if this were true, this argument makes no sense because it would actually make Noelle the loser, because Devil Xenon is stronger than 100% Xenon. The Dark Triad are stated to be equal to each other, which would just make Noelle weaker because she's fighting a weaker character. But also it just makes no sense because it was stated that pre-time skip Vanica was already stronger than Zagreid, and that was when she could only use around like 50% devil power. Yuno stands are not free from making bad arguments either. Not even kidding, I've seen Yuno stands argue that Noelle needs the water spirit in order to defeat Vanica, and that's why she would lose to Yuno. Which, guys, what are we doing here? Yuno literally has the wind spirit. That's not an argument. Another argument I see is that Yuno has had Bell longer than Noelle, so he'd win, which again, it's just not really an argument because it doesn't logically follow. Besides, you can argue that Noelle might actually be a more talented spirit host than Yuno, because she not only learned Spear Dive in 3 days, which took Yuno far longer to do, but she learned Saint Stage in 3 days. She learned Saint Stage before Yuno. Well, let's get into it. Bad arguments aside. The first major comparison is simply Boreas Yuno versus Saint Noelle. Boreas Yuno bodied 80% Xenon, but once Xenon got 100% devil power, Yuno was in trouble, and he needed help from Longris so that he could use Eurus and build up enough power to defeat Xenon, which is very different from Saint Noelle versus 100% Vanica. Noelle basically beat her mid-difficulty, and people argue that she no-diff Vanica, but that's simply not the case. Vanica took many hits from Noelle, countered some of Noelle's spells, meaning she had relative scaling to Noelle, and on top of that, Vanica's curse magic was also being nerfed by Charlotte's anti-curse Red Roses, so this was not a Vanica that was at full power. I do believe she was at most of her power, but she was not at 100% based on Charlotte nerfing her. Though I would agree that Saint Noelle would defeat Boreas Yuno, but Boreas is not even close to Yuno's peak, as Yuno would awaken his own power, Star Magic, and receive a second Grimoire from the Spade Kingdom, and this would make him far more powerful. And we can easily compare how much stronger Yuno got, as just chapters prior to this, Yuno needed his full Spear Dive and Eurus, and needed to build up enough power for 5 minutes to blow a hole through 100% Xenon's chest. But after getting Star Magic, in his base form, they can use a casual Star Magic spell that both blitzes and blows a hole through a much more powerful Devil Xenon's wing and head, meaning that after awakening his Star Magic, Yuno's casual base power had surpassed his Eurus full Spear Dive with 5 minutes of build-up and prep time. The basis of the debate from here on out is actually kind of dependent on 2 other characters, Devil Xenon, Megicula, and how strong they are. People argue that Megicula is stronger than Devil Zenon, but it muddies the water because Yuno beat Devil Zenon pretty much by himself, whereas Noelle needed help from Noelle, Rill, Charlotte, Luck, Gaja, and even Asta to defeat Megicula. So let's analyze Devil Zenon and Megicula's power level and allow that to help us determine the winner of Saint Noelle versus Saint Yuno. Let me start with Devil Zenon. Basically, we know from the jump that Devil Zenon is far more powerful than his 100% form, because when he became a devil, he immediately got far more powerful, but it's arguably even crazier than that because in his initial fights as a devil, he was holding back. This is because he goes from getting blitzed and holes blown through him by base Yuno to fighting a full Spirit Dive Zephyr Yuno a lot better. Since we actually know some of the minimum multipliers for Yuno's forms, we can actually gauge a lowball of how much stronger Devil Zenon is than 100% Zenon. In the light novel, it is stated that Bell makes Yuno many times stronger, and many means at the very least 4 according to the dictionary. Spirit Dive 2 is more than a Monozone multiplier in power, giving it an 8 times multiplier. And Yuno can stack Monozone on top of Spirit Dive 2, Monozone being at least a 2 times multiplier, because it more than doubles the size of one's aura when they activate it, and Mereoleona actually used Monozone to negate one of her own attacks that had been doubled back at her by Zora's traps. Zephyr is comparable to a Monozone increase because Yuno went from being weaker than base Lumiere to stronger than Monozone Lumiere with his Zephyr. Unfortunately, full Spirit Dive's multiplier is pretty unquantifiable, so all we can say is that because Devil Zenon scales to full Spirit Dive Zephyr Yuno, he's just far more than 32 times stronger than the 100% Dark Triad. Megicula's scaling is actually a lot more straightforward than Zenon's. It's pretty obvious that she scales above 100% Vanica because Charlotte's anti-curse magic was nearly useless against Megicula. It was not doing anything at first. And there's a moment in the Megicula battle where she takes 100 dead Dark Disciples and splits up her magic power into them. Essentially what she did is she took a fraction of her magic power and split them evenly inside of these individuals. And that means that each of these Devil Disciples have less than 1% of Megicula's power. You might think that these guys are weak because they're these quote-unquote fodder warriors that she creates, but weak is relative. They're of course weak to Megicula because it's a fraction of her power, but when you actually look at what they do, it makes Megicula's strength ridiculous. These Devil Disciples can fight and kill Rill's Twilight Valhalla Valkyrie spells. Rill's spells scale to him because he creates these things with his magic, and we know when his magic gets stronger, so do his spells and his creations. And Rill is someone who could survive in an elongated fight against 100% Vanica and Curse Lilipechka with Charlotte on his side. He'd need to be at least relative to Vanica to survive that battle. Of course, he is weaker than Vanica, but it can't be by much, or else him and Charlotte would have been killed before Noelle and Gaja came to help. But then the big thing here is that Rill activates Twilight Valhalla, which we know is a large increase in your magic power when it's activated. This would mean that his Valkyries are now likely stronger than 100% Vanica. Because these Devil Disciples can defeat Rill's Valkyries, that would mean that the Devil Disciples are stronger, or at the very least as strong as 100% Vanica. And this is also supportive of them being this strong as they are a threat to Asta. Even base Asta was powerful enough to negate an exploding life spell from Devil Lilipechka, who was already at least just as strong as Vanica prior to the explosion. And when you take all of that, what it really comes down to is that 1/3 Manifest Megicula is more than 100 times more powerful than the 100% Dark Triad. If you look at it from this perspective, you'd think that it doesn't look very good for Yuno, because he was fighting a character who we can quantify to be far more than 32 times stronger than the 100% Dark Triad, whereas Noelle was fighting a character who was far more than 100 times stronger than the 100% Dark Triad. Here's the issue though, Noelle really doesn't have any scaling to Megicula. Megicula needed to be nerfed by a Valhalla Amp Charlotte, eroded to bits by Nozelle's Mercury, just for Noelle to destroy Megicula's exposed heart. Before this, Noelle has virtually no scaling to Megicula, with basically her best feats being her armor not getting completely dissolved by Megicula's decaying world, and only being partially damaged by Megicula's curses. But when she did partially defend herself from these curses, this was a Megicula that was not even going all out yet anyways. Remember, devils love to play with their food. We saw this with Zagrid, Lucifero, Lilith and Nama, even Devil Zenon as I just mentioned a few minutes ago. Devils usually hold back and mess around with the humans that they fight because they enjoy the chaos and the despair that they create. Megicula has a few statements that imply she was holding back, and feats as well that support that, as creating that army of Devil Disciples just kind of shows that she was playing around. She got serious once Asta and Liebe and their anti-magic ability arrived into the fray. So in that context, Noelle actually has only low-end relative scaling to a suppressed Megicula, and when Megicula actually was at her full power, she was hard nerfed, and Noelle needed the help of others to expose her heart and kill her. Whereas Yuno, at least once he got Star Magic, defeated Zenon all by himself, which again actually muddies the water of what we're trying to determine here. Because we don't know how much Charlotte's anti-curses are nerfing Megicula, but it's okay because we have other ways to scale Yuno directly to Megicula. That is because one of the characters involved in Megicula fight, Noelle, was also involved in the Lucifero fight, and Yuno fought Lucifero as well, which gives us a direct comparison between Yuno and Noelle, and therefore Megicula. When Noelle arrives to fight Megicula, he's actually able to do very well against her, completely countering her blood magic spells, which shouldn't even be nerfed by Charlotte because that's blood magic, not curse magic. She stole it from Vanica, which means that Noelle scales weaker, but relative to Megicula. Whereas when Noelle would go on to do battle with Lucifero, he would be completely thrown around by Lucifero, like a child throwing a tantrum and breaking his toys. So Noelle, who scales to Megicula, got ragdolled by Lucifero. And it can be an even greater margin than you think, because we don't know if Noelle was amped by Ril's Valhalla in the Megicula fight, but we do know that he was amped by Valhalla and the Lucifero fight. But let's look at Yuno versus Lucifero. Sure, he struggled against Lucifero, and I'm absolutely not denying that, but he did far better than Noelle in that fight. In fact, he actually ends up damaging Lucifero, as here you can see shards of his defenses breaking apart, and even Lucifero believes that Yuno can end his life. To make matters worse for Noelle, Yuno was not even at full power while fighting Lucifero. This is because we know that his Saint stage is his strongest level of power, and he didn't have that against Lucifero, at least on his full Saint stage. When he's in Saint stage, his Zephyr has this design, but it doesn't when he's fighting Lucifero. So Yuno, while not even at full power, scales far above an amped Noelle, who, in his base, scales to Megicula, and at best, Noelle is relative to a weaker Megicula. I don't think I really need to get into much more. Yuno clearly has the power and speed advantage here. Not only that, Yuno has a skill advantage. I think most of you would agree that Yuno is more experienced and is a better fighter than Noelle, but he also has the abilities advantage. His star magic would act as an edge for Yuno, as he can teleport across the battlefield, but also he can create force fields with his star magic. These force fields can put up a thicker defense than Noelle's Saint Valkyrie armor, as her armor was eroded away by suppressed Megicula's decaying world. But then look at Asta. He was able to move throughout decaying world without being cursed, and Megicula was surprised by this. Now, Asta was able to do this because of his anti-mana skin, but when he faced Lucifero, his anti-mana skin couldn't actually protect him from the presence of the Demon King gravity spell. Not completely, at least. And Yuno's force field emits a complete defense against the presence of the Demon King, and crazy enough, it was base Yuno's stars as well. So I don't think that anything Noelle throws at Yuno is bypassing his defensive star magic. Yuno is stronger, faster, and more durable than Noelle. He's a more skilled fighter and has way better abilities and spells, so there's just no way that she keeps up, and so round 2 goes to Yuno. Saint Yuno beats Saint Noelle. I think it is pretty interesting that in round 1, Noelle was far and above Yuno, and then in round 2, it flipped the other way, which kind of shows how crazy Black Clover's power progression can go, where in a single arc with only 3 days in between them, the power balance can shift entirely. Now, I'm really interested for when Noelle finally shows her power-up in the Judgment Day battle, because doing a Neverland Yuno versus Sea Goddess Noelle video in the future would be an interesting finale to this video series, because I did do a part 1 to this many years ago. With that being said, please comment your thoughts down below. Who do you think wins, Saint Noelle versus Saint Yuno, or even back in Arc 1, Valkyrie Noelle versus Spirit Dive 2 Monozone Spade Yuno? I just think that the preponderance of evidence supports my opinions, but let me know if you think I got anything wrong, or if you think there's anything I missed that even supports my opinions even further. Please leave a like if you did enjoy. You can comment down below, subscribe and turn notifications, and also please follow me on Twitter and join my Discord link below. Hope you guys all have an amazing day. Peace out.